Just bear with me 1 second. If it's saying that it's live, but I just want to double check. All right. I'd like to start off by saying Barakateh Hawa, Ba'ashem, Yahushai, Ba'ashem, Rucha Kodash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one pretty much is you monkey-minded fools. And pretty much this is a video response to the video you see before you, which was done by the elder Mathathia from the Des Moines camp, formerly of GMS Chicago. And he was doing a response to Elder Pastor's video where he spoke about these monkey-minded Christians. And I just wanted to, bring another insight to it because on Elder Pastor's video, he pretty much played a portion of the other video where the IUIC were going to go into the Apocrypha to make a point, to make a point. And pretty much the Christian dude said, well, I don't know nothing about no Apocrypha. I don't have no Apocrypha. There ain't no Apocrypha. And, in the 66 books, the 666, and he kept saying 666 books. He kept saying 666. He had a affinity with that number. And even the Elder Pastor said that. So what I want to do is I want to come at it from a different angle because last night sometime, the up-and-coming Elder Quanawath from the New York camp, the tall Benjaminite brother, sent me a scripture in the book of Maccabees, 2 Maccabees 6, but he sent it to me in the GNT. So I kind of want to highlight that in this lesson because the Apocrypha is very important to, the rest of the scriptures because it contains the history of the Greeks, and if you don't know the history of the Greeks and what happened during the Greek Empire and what happened to us as a people, mainly the Southern Kingdom, you had a sprinkle of the Northern, but it was mainly the Southern Kingdom. If you don't understand that history, then when you read the New Testament, you're going to have the mindset of this modern world Christian view that the Lord, wants to deliver everybody and save everybody. But if you understand that very important Greek history and what took place, what's called the Hellenization of the Israelites or the Hellenization of the Jews, if you don't understand that, you're not going to understand the New Testament. But if you know that history, when you read the New Testament makes all the sense in the world, So let's start off here, 2 Maccabees, chapter 6. This is in the GNT, Good News Translation. And right here it says, the Jews are persecuted because of their faith. Right? So it says, this is the first verse. Not long after that, the king sent an elderly Athenian to force the Jews to abandon their religion and customs of their ancestors. And this is very important because you had those that fought tooth and nail, like the Maccabees, the Hasmoneans, they fought tooth and nail not to assimilate into the culture, language, religion of the Greeks. But you had other Israelites that jumped on board. You see, and those other Israelites that jumped on board eventually had children, and they had children. They died off, and other generations came. So you're talking about now 200 years into the future when Yahushua was on the scene, that this had been going on. So it was like an indoctrination to every Israelite that was born to those parents whose ancestors conformed to the religion of the Greeks and followed the Greeks. So that's why they didn't circumcise their children, their sons, so on and so forth. That's why by the time Yahushua came on the scene, these children were being born, speaking the Greek language, eating the Greek diet, following and worshiping the Greek gods, had no clue idea who the hell they were. And this is why, Yahushua came on the scene to gather from among those that were scattered among these nations, the ones that were a part of the elect, that were caught up into those philosophies and religions. This is why we're just going to get this real quick and then come back. This is the book of 1 Corinthians, chapter 12 and verse 1, but the main point is in verse 2. Now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I would not have you ignorant. You know that you were, past tense, Gentiles, carried away into these dumb idols, even as you were led. So these idols that you were following after, this is what polluted you. This is what made you unclean. This is what made you uncircumcised. And you have Jakes that were uncircumcised in the mind, and then in most cases, being scattered among these nations, they would be physically uncircumcised too. The males, they wouldn't have circumcision, because that was the custom of the Greeks, and that's what each parent passed on to their sons and their sons all the way up until the time of Yahushua. All right, and if you don't understand that history, you're going to be lost. So going back here, verse 2, 2 Maccabees 6:2, he was also to defile their temple, which is the temple of Jerusalem, by dedicating it to the Olympian god Zeus. The temple on Mount Gerizim was to be officially named Temple of Zeus, the god of hospitality, as the people who lived there had requested. The oppression was harsh and almost intolerable. You have to understand what was going on. It was harsh conditions. Some Jakes fought to the death. Others said, "The hell with this, we want it easy. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to conform to the religion of these, these Gentiles or these Greeks." Gentiles filled the temple with drinking parties and of all sorts and all sorts of immorality. This is why the Apostle Paul said, "Don't do that." In the book of Romans, the 13th chapter. Romans, the 13th chapter, shows you, how the Apostle Paul was speaking about these chamberings and these riots. This is what these Israelites were used to, because they were following along the traditions and the religions of the Greeks. And that's the same thing Jake was doing. No different than today. You see Jake in the clubs, partying, dancing, drunk, In some cases, you have, individuals that escape to certain corners and, men getting, BJs and, having sex with women in the clubs. There's some clubs that are like that. What do you think that goes back to? That goes back to the Greek freaks. In New York years ago, back in I think it was the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure how far back it goes, but you had something called Studio 54. Now, Studio 54 was straight up freakism. All right, straight up freakism. And you had celebrities going there, it was, but that goes back to the Greeks. That goes back to the Romans, but definitely to the Greeks. Right? They even had intercourse with prostitutes there. See, forbidden, because one thing that the nations did was they had sex, with their they had sex with prostitutes. Sometimes it'd be male, sometimes it'd be male on male, female on female, or sometimes it'd be male on female, so on and so forth, because that was a part of the custom of the nations. And this is why Phinehas ran that Israelite with a spear through the back and the woman through the stomach, because he was having, not because he was having sex with the woman, but because he was having sex in the name of her God. That's what, that what angered Phineas. And the Most High was already pissed off. But when he did that, he what's the word I'm looking for? He now I don't want to use the word pacified, but that's the best word I could think of right now. The anger of the Lord, and the Lord was pleased with that. It says, forbidden objects were brought into the temple, and the altar was covered with detestable sacrifices prohibited by our law, like pork, mainly pork. It was impossible to observe the Sabbath, to celebrate any of the traditional festivals, or even so much as to admit to being a Jew. And you couldn't even call yourself that. In the King James Version, it says you weren't even able to call yourself an Israelite. So how about that? But now check this out. Each month, when the king's birthday was celebrated, the Jews were compelled by brute force to eat the intestines of sacrificial animals. Then during the festival, in honor of the wine god Dionysius, they were required to wear ivy wreaths on their heads and march in procession. That was part of what they did back then. On the advice of Ptolemy, now this is Ptolemy. Now remember, this is Antiochus Epiphanes up here. Now the Ptolemy that ruled during the time of, I'm not sure if this was Ptolemy the 4th or the 5th, when he came on the scene, he pretty much jumped on board. So it says, on the advice of Ptolemy, the neighboring Greek cities were also instructed to require Jews to eat the sacrifices. They were told to put to death every Jew who refused to adopt the Greek way of life. See? Put to death every Jew who refused to adopt the Greek way of life. So now you understand. Now you're starting to understand and to see why it's important to understand this history. So at the threat of death, you had Jakes that were not able to keep the laws of Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. Some did it just because they said the hell with it. They wanted to live good. But the ones that didn't, they suffered great persecution. Okay, it says it was easy to see that hard times were ahead. See, and you could read on. You could continue on. It goes into shit that he did. And how on the Sabbath, the mothers, were put to death with their babies for circumcising their babies, and how you had Israelites that fled to mountains, in order to keep the Sabbath, and then they found out and they rolled on them and they put them to death because they wouldn't fight on the Sabbath because they were honoring the Lord's Sabbath. And then the Maccabees came to the conclusion, said, look, man, if we don't fight on the Sabbath, these devils is going to kill us all. So they had to do what they had to do. All right. So now what I did here, because, it's all kind of thoughts started coming to mind. I went to the Google, regular Google, right? And I typed in, and this is the reason why, because what I did was I typed in here, just in the King James, KJV, I typed in just the word Greek and I got several precepts here, right? Now, I'm just going to get the first one, and then we're going to get some more info, because I did a lesson on this probably about maybe a few months ago, maybe a little longer. I can't remember exactly how long, going into how you had a lot of Israelites in the land of Syria, even to this day. Mark 7:26, the woman was a Greek. This is dealing with that woman, that came to Yahushua to ask him to heal her daughter, right? And she was a Greek. She was a white woman. She was an Edomite. No, she was not. She was an Israelite that was living in those regions. And I'm going to show you that. The woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by nation, and she besought him that he would cast forth the devil out of her daughter. So she was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by nation. Now, a Syrophoenician is one that lives in the land of Syria and Palestine. Remember that land there was a Canaanite's land, and then you had Aram that was just right up above it. All right. So what I did was I typed in Did Antiochus Epiphanes bring Jews to Syria captive? It said AI overview. Yes. Historical accounts indicate that Antiochus IV Epiphanes, the Seleucid king, carried Jews captive to Syria. So this woman who was living there, because that was her non-nationality, that was her citizenship. She was a Syrophoenician by citizenship because she was living there, but she wasn't an actual Syrophoenician. She was speaking the Greek language, right? So it says here, after taking Jerusalem by storm in 167 BCE, Antiochus ordered a massacre and then carried some inhabitants captive to Syria, including women and children, with the number of captives estimated at around 10,000. And you know how rapid Jake multiplies. So you could imagine how many Israelites are in the land of Syria even to this day. When a rumor reached Antiochus that there was an uprising in Jerusalem during his campaign in Egypt, he responded by sending an army to crush the perceived revolt. He attacked Jerusalem, killing thousands and enslaving many more. Well, that's bullshit right there. The Jewish sources like books of Maccabees and Josephus portray Antiochus IV's action in a strongly negative light. Yeah, it was negative, emphasizing his persecution and desecration of the temple. That's exactly what he did. The exact reason for Antiochus' actions and the scale of the persecution are subject to scholarly debate. Well, there's no scholarly debate. No, that's what he did. That's why to this day we keep what's known as the Feast of Hanukkah, which is the Feast of Lights or the Feast of Dedication, which is something that they showed them, and they were trying to, I'm talking about the IUIC was showing them monkey-minded Christians, that the Feast of Dedication is in the Scripture, so the Apocrypha is a part of the Bible, because even Yahweh Shai kept it. But then they don't know what the fuck is going on. They don't know shit about the Bible. There's another video of Elder Pastor did. The Christians don't know shit about the Bible. Because they don't understand the history. They're not looking at the Scriptures in a spiritual eye. They're looking at the Scriptures in a world Christian view style. And if you come in with that warped mind, and if the Lord ain't with you, you're going to be stuck on it. You see? But if the Lord is working with an individual, open up their mind and say, oh, that's why it says, the Gentiles will be saved and the Greeks, this, that, and the other. So now let's get to that. Here, we read that. So this woman was an Israelite. Luke 23 and 38. Oh, what happened? Okay. I have marked some of these. Luke 23:38. This is dealing with the superscription that was put over Yahweh Shai's cross. And this is what Pontius Pilate wrote on it. Right, he wrote Yahweh Shai, King of the Jews, of Nazareth. You have something called Inri. Yahweh Shai, Nazareth, Rex, which is King. The I at the end is Jews. All right, King of the Jews, King of the Israelites. All right, it says, and a superscription also was written over him in letters of Greek and Latin and Hebrew. This the King of the Jews. All right, and then in the next verse, both in Luke 23:38 and John 19 and 20. The next verse said this matter of fact, let me just go to it. It says right here. Oh shit, that was the one. This title then read, many of the Jews. Okay. For the place where Yahweh Shai was crucified was nigh to the city, and it was written in Hebrew and Greek and Latin. So why did many of the Jews read it? Because you had Israelites that were speaking all of these different languages because of the diaspora, the dispersing, the scattering, and then this time here, when we go back to, 30 AD, and that era right there, this history was fresh, was very fresh. in the minds of the Israelites, in the minds of the what they call the Sanhedrin, which were the councils, and you had different sects, that ruled those councils, like the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the lawyers, the scribes, so on and so forth. And they understood about that history. This is why they looked down upon those Israelites that went that way, because they're saying, look, our forefathers fought. Your forefathers you're turncoats. You're a bunch of sambos. This ain't for you anymore. And that was a big, argument back then, the big Gentile argument, that those Israelites that were being called Gentiles could not be a partaker of this anymore, because they forsook, their chance during the time of the Greek Empire. Right? So this is Acts 16:1. Then came he to Derbe and Lystra. This is the Apostle Paul. And behold, a certain disciple was there named Timothy, the son of a certain woman, which his mother's name was, I believe her name was Eunice. His grandmother's name was Lois, which was a Jewess, because she was an actual Israelite, and believed, but his father was a Greek. So he was an Israelite that was staunchly stuck on the Greek ways. He wasn't budging. Just like you have today, you have Jakes that are staunchly stuck on being Americans, and you can't sway them. No, I'm black American. No, I'm not no Jew. They ain't trying to hear anything you're trying to say, because they are proud to be Americans, because they have that Sambo mentality. Well, this is what was happening with the Timothy's father. All right. And that's what happened with Tiberius Julius Alexander. He was an Israelite that knew he was an Israelite, but he chose, the Greek ways, over, or he preferred the Greek ways over his Israelite descendancy. Let me see. Did Tiberius Julius Alexander, missed the A, deny his, I have to say it this way, Jewish ancestry? Let me see. While Tiberius Julius Alexander was born into a wealthy Jewish family in Alexandria, he is generally understood to have largely abandoned his Jewish heritage or Israelite heritage and embraced Roman culture and career. He did not explicitly deny his Israelite ancestry, but he is described as an apostate from Judaism, meaning he renounced his religion and customs. So what is it? He did or he didn't? So he's an apostate. That's why you have apostates. That's why you had apostates among the Sumerians, because they were Israelites that were accused. When you go to the Josephus, it tell you that they were accused by the council, in Jerusalem. And because they didn't want to, either they were being judged wrongly or they were being judged unfairly, or whether they actually did it, they fled to Samaria for refuge. You had a large community of Israelites among those Samaritans. That's why when Yahushua went to that woman at the well, who was not an Edomite, she was a heathen, he told her, go get your husband, because her husband was an Israelite. And the other men that were there, certain of them were Israelites. That's why he told her to go get her husband. That's why he told her, you don't know what you worship, and you ain't going to worship here. But go get your husband. Why? Because he's an Israelite. Why the hell would the Lord ask her to get her husband if he was a heathen? You have to understand that history. There was a great, what they call apostasy or apostates that fled from Israel into the land of Samaria, or from those regions there, Jerusalem and those areas, into Samaria. All right, and these Israelites that maintained their faith, so to speak, looked down upon the Israelites that didn't. All right. All right, so Tiberius Julius Alexander's father was a prominent Israelite figure in Alexandria, and his uncle, and Alexandria is down in Egypt. You had a large community of Israelites in Egypt. All right, in Cyprus, not Cyprus, well, Cyprus too, but Cyrene, which is in northern so-called Africa. And his uncle was a famous philosopher. Oh, his uncle was the famous philosopher Philo of Alexandria. See, so Philo was a Jake. Remember how the elder pastor had been saying that those philosophers, those Greek philosophers, were Jake. That whole Greek mythology, Jake came up with that. And they based it off of certain shit that Esau was worshiping. Let me see. Abandonment of Israelite. Despite his family's Israelite background, Tiberius Julius Alexander rose to prominence in the Roman world, holding high-ranking positions like procurator of Judea and prefect of Egypt. Apostate label. Historical sources, including the Israelite historian Josephus, portray him as having abandoned his ancestral Israelite customs and religion. All right. So now let's go back here. So Timothy's father was a Greek. He was an Israelite that was staunchly stuck on the Greek philosophies. Just like you have these Jakes that's staunchly stuck on being Americans, or staunchly stuck in the religious institution that they're currently in. Right, in the verse 3, him would Paul have to go forth with him and took and circumcised him because of the Israelites or the Jews which were in those quarters, for they knew all that his father was a Greek. Right, that they had disdain for these Israelites that were, still holding on to that Greek way. And that's why the Apostle Paul went and circumcised. This is right after, because this is Acts 16. This is right after it was said that those Israelite foreigners didn't have to be circumcised. But the Apostle Paul made this decree, right? Because he needed Timothy to roll, and it was all spiritual. It was all spiritual. All right. That's why he told Timothy later on, let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. Or was that in the Corinthians? Is it the Corinthians or Romans? He said it in one of the letters. Right. Romans 1:16. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Yahushua, for it is the power of the Most High unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first. Why? Because Judah is supposed to be supposed to get it first, and also to the Greek, the rest of the Israelites. And at this time, right, when this was going on, these were other southern kingdom, Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, that was scattered among these Greeks that were speaking the Greek language and following the Greek custom, because the majority of the so-called Latin tribes were already on this side of the world. So this really here, Jew first, and to the Greek, this is really to the southern kingdom that was there. One part of them was being called Israelites, the other part of them were being called Greeks or Gentiles. Romans 10:12, for there is no difference between the Jew and the Greek. Why? Because they're both Israelites. It's just that they speak in different languages. And matter of fact, this one here, the Jew first, right? Let's just go real quick. Zechariah, I believe it's 12:7. Come. The Lord Yahweh Bashem Al-Shai also shall save the tents of Judah first, that the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem do not magnify themselves against Judah, because Judah is the head. So that's why I said here, to the Jew first. Now when we jump to the next verse, for there is no difference between the Jew and the Greek, for the same Lord over all is rich unto all that call upon him. Well, these are Israelite foreigners that were only speaking Greek. But then you had those Israelites that were keeping the customs, but just happened to be speaking the Greek language because of where they were born, whether in Alexandria, Cyrene, or wherever. Different parts of Asia Minor. Let's go real quick to Acts 6 and 1. And in those days, when the number of the disciples was multiplied, there arose a murmuring of the Grecians against the Hebrews, because their widows were neglected in the daily ministration. Now check this out. When you go to the word Grecians, so you have some hints and some clues, in the New Testament, but when you understand the history of the Greek Empire and the Hellenization of the Israelites, that's when the whole picture comes together. So you have the word there, Hellenization, which in the English was Grecian, right? A Hellenist, one who imitates the manners and customs or the worship of the Greeks and use the Greek language. Use the New Testament of Jews born in foreign lands and speaking Greek. See? And that's why, when we read earlier up above in St. John 19 and 20, this title then read, many of the Jews, for the place where Yahushua was crucified was nigh to the city, and it was written in Hebrew and Greek and Latin. Why? Because you had Israelites that were speaking all of those different languages. All right. This is Galatians 2 and 3. But neither Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, because he was an Israelite that was in that Greek state. And then he believed in the Lord, but he didn't want to be circumcised. That's why the Apostle Paul said, let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. Was compelled to be circumcised. So he didn't want to be circumcised. Galatians 3:8, there is neither Jew nor Greek. Why? Because they're both Israelites. Once we come back into Yahushua, we become what? A new creature. And that's why the Apostle Paul said he counted everything that he had before him done. All of that status that he has done. The Israelite foreigners, everything that they did, that's all done. Now we got to rebuild and be renewed. Colossians 3 and 11, where there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond nor free, but Yahushua is all and in all, right? And then barbarians and Scythians, those are all Jakes. They were just uncouth. Just want to check something real quick. And we'll move on. Just bear with me. All right, so here, this was used in the New Testament of Jews born in foreign lands and speaking Greek. That's a Hellenization, which goes back to the Greek word Hellen, which means Greek, Gentile. So you have to know how to apply it. You have to know when it's speaking about the language. You have to know when it's speaking about an Israelite foreigner. You have to know when it's speaking about an actual nation. You see? And it's all about the context of the scripture. The Gentiles and Greeks that salvation is promised to, these are Israelites that were caught up in that Hellenization period. But when it speaks about, like in the case of here in Matthew chapter 10 and 18, and you shall be brought before governors and kings for my sake, for a testimony against them and the Gentiles. You see? So in this case, we know that this is talking about the other nations. When judgment is coming, we know it's talking about the other nations. But when salvation is spoken of, it's talking about the Israelite foreigners. And this is why you must have the spirit of Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua to be able to discern these things. Right here, Revelation 2:26. And he that overcometh and keepeth my works unto the end, to him will I give power over the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, as the vessels of a potter shall they be broken to shivers. Now we know that's talking about the other nations, even as I received of my Father. So why didn't they put Gentiles here? Were they trying to be slick? Nations, right there. Ethnos goes back to the same thing. So you have ethnos goes back to the word ethnicity. Whatever ethnicity you belong to. These Israelite foreigners were of the ethnicity of Israel, but they were being called Greeks or Ephesians or Galatians or whatever the case may be. A multitude, whether of men or of beasts, associated or living together. A company, troop, swarm, a multitude of individuals of the same nature or genus. Right, going back to the same genealogy. Then it says here, there's no such thing as a human family. The Lord separated all nations into all people into nations. Let's go real quick, Deuteronomy 32. This is, for you newer members that may not be familiar with these precepts. And just what Elder Apostle Bar always stresses on, take notes, write these things down. If the lesson is going fast, take notes, write them down. You could pause the video, you can go back, and then that way when you go back and you look at these scriptures, you can see it for yourself. Deuteronomy 32:8. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam. So if the Most High separated the sons of Adam, why is Esau talking about the human race? There's no such thing as a human race. There's people, but because the word race goes back to the word raza, or goes back to the word seed. So there's not a human race. There are nations of people on the planet that belong to particular nations. This is why the Lord divided everyone into nations. When he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. For the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. See? So he chose Israel through Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he gave them the best portion of land. But he separated all the other nations. All right? So here, this is off the human race or human family. A tribe, nation, people group, yeah. In the Old Testament, foreign nations not worshiping the true God, pagans, Gentiles. Nope, it's talking about Israelite. Or if we're going to deal with this in the case of Revelation chapter 2 and 26, yeah. Of course, that's talking about the other nations. But in other cases, it's talking about the Israelites. Paul uses the term for Gentile Christians, which are Israelites, Israelite foreigners. So it depends on how you use the scripture or what the context of the scripture is. This is why context is important. All right, so let's see. So Hellenization, Hellene, right, which are the Greeks, which are, could it be applied to either the Israelites or it could be applied to the other nations. It could be applied to Esau. It depends on how it's used. In the case of this Hellenization, these are Israelites that were speaking the Greek language, but they knew that they were Israelites. And even them, the Israelites, the Hebrews, looked down upon them. This is why they were neglecting them. You see, they were showing favoritism to the ones that spoke Hebrew, and then they were, when they spoke to the other ones that didn't speak Hebrew and they saw that they were speaking Greek, they was like, all right, you just sit to the side. I'll take care of you when I take care of you. They were looking down on them in disdain. So if you don't understand the Apocrypha and the history of the Greeks and what happened to the Israelites when they became Hellenized, you're not going to understand the New Testament. So with that, we pray that you, brother, and it's a waste of time going back and forth with these Christians, man. But some of these guys, they like the publicity, maybe in those events they get paid or whatever, but it's a waste of time. So with that, I pray that you brothers and sisters have been edified. Till the next time I say shalom.